The word of the day is flush trim. And I didn't put that up there because I was grading a bunch of stuff. The word of the day is flush trim. Anybody know what flush trim means? Yeah.
Isn't it like when it's straight, like you can't feel a bump or anything on the side?
So absolutely. There's two parts of the word. One is flush, which we've talked about earlier in the class, meaning that two pieces are lined up perfectly. So you can run your finger across it and not tell that there's a difference in one piece to the other. And trim means we want to trim them to be flush. So this right here is called a flush trim router bit. What it does, it looks pretty gnarly, but what it does is this bearing right here, when we flip it over, it will ride on the panel of our project. So you guys can see over here, this bearing and the blades are lined up perfect. So this is gonna cut until this bearing touches the side panel. As you can see again, this would cut until the bearing hits the side panel. And what it's gonna do is take this extra little bit off of here and it's gonna make it into sawdust. So it does make kind of a mess for people sitting over here. Just be prepared that you might get some sawdust thrown at you. But before I turn you guys loose to do it, there's a couple dangers in using a flush trim router bit. One of the biggest ones is that there's a lot of blades sticking out of the top there. This thing spins at about 12,000 RPMs, so if it does touch anything, it chews it up really well. I know of two accidents that have happened to this. One happened to a friend of mine at a cabinet shop I worked at. She was flush trimming a cabinet, wasn't paying attention to where the cord was, and she flush trimmed right through the cord. So the cord was down here and she cut right through the cord. It shocked her pretty good and it wrecked the router. So please be careful where the cord is. I always drape the cord over my shoulder. That way I know it's not anywhere near the bit. The other one, the guy ran it right up his thumb. He was only using it with one hand, which is dangerous. So it's important that we use both hands because I guarantee it, if you have both hands on the router, you can't cut your hand. So that really is, a lot of guys will be kind of hot shots and gals might be hot shots and try to do it like this. Okay, and after you've done this 1,000 times, maybe you could try doing something like that. But I still use it with two hands, and most of the time, all the time, you guys need to use it with two hands. The only exception would be when you turn it on. You can't do that with your nose or your tongue or something like that. You have to do that with your finger. Okay. When we're done with the router, it gets wrapped up nice like this. And this router is a little bit louder. Again, if you want earmuffs or earplugs, feel free to bring those things in. If you want to, you can find somewhere to store them here. Otherwise, we'll have to deal with it for now. So if the noise makes you uncomfortable, that's okay. First thing in using a handheld router that you need to do is make sure that it's off. There's a little button here that says on, off. You're probably not going to be able to read that from where you're sitting, but from here you definitely can read that. Make sure that button is pushed in the off position because you can imagine it would be dangerous. If I set this here and plugged it in and that thing all of a sudden took off, it'll spin over and fall into the ground. So make sure that's off when you plug it in. Second one is safety glasses. You need to have the safety glasses on. So Michael is hoping that it's off right now. Okay. Now that it's off, when I hold this, again, I hold it with this draped over my shoulder. That way I know that even if it does fall off my shoulder, it's going to fall away from the router. So if you have this draped over your shoulder, and it's nice to have these outlets that are up high on the ceiling, because it does kind of keep the cord out of your way. This is just like that router back there. We only want to go in one direction. You'll know if you go in the wrong direction because it'll take it and it'll want to pull it away. Now, if you are on this and have a good grip on this, it's not going to be able to pull you any direction you don't want to go. I guarantee you that you are strong enough to control this router. But you'll notice if you start moving it the wrong way, it'll all of a sudden get really easy to move and it'll kind of pull itself quickly away from where you want it to go if you're not being careful. So don't let that happen. We're actually going to use both directions on this, and I'm going to explain that as I go. If I go only against the grain, like we talk about on the router table, it will take off all of this material in one pass. If you don't have a whole lot of material, that's not a big deal, but I've got a good 1/16 of an inch or so hanging out. What do you think would happen if I took all that off in one pass? What's a danger that could happen to my project? Anybody have any ideas? It's rough, so it won't be a smooth cut. That's right. Yep.
That's what I was gonna say.
The other problem is that it has a tendency to chip out. It's like you're overloading the tool, And when you overload something, something's got to give. And what happens sometimes is big chunks come flying off of here, and you don't want that to have happen. Whereas if you go the opposite direction and push it, it's only going to take off a little bit at a time. So what I like to do is I'll pull it back by pulling it, and it really depends. When I say push-pull, if I was standing on this side, it would be opposite because the arbor spins the same direction. Either way, you can't reverse it. And you'll get a feel for this. You'll notice this when I use it. I'll go one direction several times where I only take off a little bit, and then my final pass will go opposite of the router rotation. By going opposite of the router rotation, I ensure that I clean everything up, and then it looks really nice. So why don't I demonstrate that for you while we're going, and realize you're going to get hit with stuff. And you can see on here, hold it up so you can see, it's not done. I'd have to make more than one pass with this, and it's a little bit wavy. But I did take some off, and obviously I made a little bit of a mess over here. Please, when you're doing this, make sure that someone's backpack isn't sitting open down there, that you're going to fill up with sawdust. But what I like to do, a little technique thing, and because this is all of our first time using a flush trim router, I like to come up here to almost at the very top. And I'll come in about an inch down, and I'll just use my wrist and pop it all the way up to the top, and then I start coming back. If I would start here, and go up, that would take everything off in one pass, and that's when I run the risk of taking too much off. So I want to go this way, I'll pull it towards me 2 or 3 times until I feel like I'm just about done with it, and then my very last pass I will push towards. So let me finish this up. Yes, so that's a good question. When we're using a handheld router, we need to be aware of the direction that we're pushing it. We're going to use both sides. So it's unlike the router table where we only push on one side. We'll go both ways using this router, but we have to be careful when we're doing it. So like we talked about, those first passes we are actually going with the router, with the direction of the router. But by doing that, we're not taking off so much material. It's actually, with a handheld router, it's more dangerous to go against the grain right away because that's when we start wrecking our project. We start taking huge chunks out of it. And you can feel that right now, this is almost perfect. It's not quite perfect. If I want to get it perfect, that's when I use the sander to sand that down so it is nice and flush and smooth. A little bit about doing the other side now. I would just flip this around and do the exact same thing over here. I'm going to do this one quickly, not quickly so it's dangerous, but quickly. I'm not going to explain anything. I'm just going to do the whole pass at one time, and then I'll talk for 2 more minutes and we'll get working. So hold it firm. Some people like to have it set down here. That's fine. We turn it on. Don't let that wind down. That's the last thing we want to have is that falling. Not a problem.
Somebody left this in my room. Are you Eric T? I guess that was left.
Thank you. Some people will want to use the flush trim router bit on the face frame up here. Please refrain from doing that. The problem is if this sticks up a little bit and I flush trim it, is when I get to the edge here, it's a round bit trying to cut out a square hole. And what'll happen is, sure, it'll make this nice and flush right here, but when I get to the corner, it's going to dig into the sides here. So please don't use that on your shelves, only on the sides. The next thing we do after we flush trim is we're going to use putty. We've got putty over there by the glue. It's in that white container. Please make sure the lid goes on that when you're not using it. And we're going to putty in the staple holes, and we'll putty any cracks that we see along the face frame. So when we're done with this, we should see no cracks at all on the face frame. I have a few little ones that I want to get taken care of here. That putty is water-based, so we'll let it dry for about 15 minutes, and then we can sand it, and it should look like the wood, the base wood, when we're done. And especially after we stain it, it will blend in very nicely. Last thing I want to tell you, where people run into trouble with the flush trim router is if they, well, one, I've seen people do it like this. Well, they'll take and they'll flush trim a side that doesn't need to be flush trimmed. Okay, we don't need to do that, and I've seen that happen twice. Another thing people will do is if they get this at any sort of an angle, and it's fairly easy to do, especially if you're pushing really hard down and really nervous about this, we want to let this part just ride nicely on our board here. So please, if you go this way, it's not going to be an issue. But if you go this way, that's when it becomes an issue. And nobody's going to run it at this steep of an angle, but even at an angle like this will cause you some problems. So make sure that this is nice, flat, and you're going nice, slow, and steady, like it said on the safety test. If you don't send your face frame through the time saver and you have a little bump here, what do you think will happen?
It'll be all wavy.
I'll hit it here, and it'll either kick it out or won't go. So you got to have these things be nice and flush. They shouldn't be sticking up when you want to run your flush trim. So after you flush trim, we putty all the holes on your face frame and the staple holes on the side, and then we should be good to go. And once you guys are done with that, I'm looking probably, this is Tuesday, probably on Thursday or maybe even tomorrow, I'm going to show you guys how to glue up the top of your project. We are burning through this project way faster than last term did. So you're doing great. Any questions? You guys can go to work.